Hey, it's Nancy. Before we begin today, I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
A listener's note. The following episode contains coarse language, adult themes, and content of a violent and disturbing nature, and may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In the fall of 2000, in the scenic town of Rocky Mountain House, a road crew was hard at work. They were doing paving in the area, about a 2-hour drive northwest of Calgary. That September was particularly busy, as they tried to complete the job before the first inevitable snowfall. The work was hard and the days were long, but it was customary for the crew to go out for dinner and a few drinks to cap off each night together. But following one of those gatherings, tragedy struck.
He had phoned there and said he had been attacked, and people from the 7-Eleven said this guy was all bloody.
That call led police to a horrific scene.
He was an extremely angry person, and he was driven by anger.
Well, we did take her to a doctor, and the first thing the doctor said to her was, "Let me guess, someone that's supposed to love you did this to you."
I'm Nancy Hixt, a crime reporter for Global News. Today on Crime Beat, a case that stayed with me for more than 20 years. This is the story of Brooke Clapson and the violence that followed her. This story begins in Calgary in 1979, when Donna Eaton first became a mom.
I was terrified to have my first child at 21. She was born by an emergency C-section, and so I was absolutely terrified that something was going to happen to her or something was going to happen to me. So when they woke me up after surgery and told me I had a daughter, I wouldn't believe them. She always told me, "You just never believed I was really here."
From that moment on, Brooke Clapson was a ray of sunshine in her mother's life.
Oh, she was an absolute angel. She slept through the night early. She was loving and just adored animals, adored me. She was just such a good child. Like when she was in elementary school, I remember going to a parent-teacher interview and the teachers telling me, "We hate to punish Brooke for being good, but we put the problem children to sit with her because she tells them, 'Be quiet, you'll never learn anything if you don't be quiet.'"
Brooke was 10 years old when Donna had her second daughter, Becky.
All Brooke ever wanted was a baby sister. And the day her baby sister was born, she was the happiest girl on the planet.
But there was a dark shadow looming over their home: domestic abuse. Donna said she eventually fled the relationship, but it was a struggle. She was a single mom and needed to provide for her girls. They didn't leave unscathed. Wounds and scars were already there. Brooke expressed her feelings through poetry.
She loved to write poetry and stories. Her poetry, I have many books of her poetry, and some of it's quite dark. A lot of it's about her sister and how much she loved her sister. And I just, she would put on such a smiling face, but you could see behind those eyes that there was a lot of darkness. And I did my best to try and help her deal with it. But again, at that time, you got to think mid-90s, nobody wanted to talk about domestic violence and the effect it had on women or the family unit at all.
As a teenager, Brooke struggled to escape the darkness.
That's when the wheels really came off, because I think there were some really deep-seated issues that she just refused to talk about and refused to let me help her deal with.
Studies have shown for children, exposure to violence can have long-term emotional, cognitive, social, and behavioral impacts.
Because he was so abusive and violent that she wouldn't talk about it. And I tried to get us counseling, and I took her several times to the Eastside Walk-In counseling clinic, and she would just shut down. She wouldn't talk about anything. She went from being so driven by the rules to rules don't matter. I don't care. I'm going to get up and go to school and sit out behind the school and smoke dope all day. She wanted to try everything, do everything. She didn't feel the consequences. Consequences be damned. I'm having fun. From the moment she was 16, I couldn't follow her around every day. I had to work. I had to just, by the grace of God, be there for her when she was willing to talk and share with me what was going on and try and guide her to the best of my abilities.
One veteran police officer I know who specifically worked in domestic conflict told me investigators often use the expression, "you live what you learn." That's exactly what happened when Brooke started dating.
She had quite a parade of young men. She was a beautiful woman, and she had quite a parade of young men interested in her. Unfortunately, like most children from abusive situations, she gravitated towards abusive men, controlling men, boys that would not treat her well. I just was always so concerned for her.
Brooke was 17 when one of her friends introduced her to the man who would change her life.
His name was Jerime Mallette. I didn't know much about him other than he didn't work, but he always seemed to have money.
You have to remember, Donna was a single mom, and Brooke grew up pinching pennies.
Yeah, it was trips to the thrift store and trips to Kmart. She always used to say, "Mom, I can't be seen in Kmart." And I said, well, guess what? If someone sees you in Kmart, they're in Kmart too. So it could be your little secret.
Jerime Mallette, on the other hand, was 2 years older than Brooke, and he lavished her with things she always dreamed of having.
He used to give her gifts of designer clothes and shoes and bags. And I'd be like, where'd you get that? And, a friend gave it to me. And I'd be like, what friend? What's going on? Tell me.
It turned out he had money because he was heavily involved in crime.
He was a career criminal. He made his living by B&Es and shoplifting and selling drugs. She didn't tell me much about him, I think because of his lifestyle. She knew I wouldn't approve. And so she didn't tell me much about him.
Donna said in their first year dating, Jerime encouraged Brooke to skip school. She would take off for days at a time, and she didn't end up graduating.
She was over 18. She came and went as she pleased. And, my main focus was to keep my door open for the day that the elevator started to move to the top, and she decided to go back to school.
Throughout their 3-year on-again, off-again relationship, Mallette was in and out of jail. Court records show that by the late 90s, he was convicted of more than a dozen crimes, mostly property-related offenses, but he also had convictions for assault, breach of probation, and obstructing a peace officer. Donna's worst fears were coming true. Nothing she said seemed to help Brooke realize just how bad Jerime was for her.
She'd just be like, "Oh, Mom, you don't know him like I do."
Then it happened. Brooke fell victim to the same abuse she witnessed as a child.
I'm not sure exactly what happened. She called me just hysterical. He was really careful. He kicked her mostly in the midriff, and in the back. Not a lot of damage to her face at that time. Most abusers won't hit the face because most people can see it. And by this time, he was a well-seasoned abuser. I just said to her, I said, do you want to live like I've been living? You don't want this in your life. And she agreed, and she started moving forward with her life. She got another job. She, was not hanging out with him. He came back to Calgary and went into an anger management program at the Peter Lougheed Hospital.
But Jerime wasn't about to give up Brooke.
He was obsessed with the telephone. He would phone all hours of the day and night. If he couldn't find her, he would wait outside her work and get on the same bus as her, try and talk to her.
Donna said every time Brooke tried to cut contact with Jerime, he did something to manipulate her into taking him back.
Well, because then he'd start stalking me or Becky or my mom. Then she kind of would try and smooth the waters and go back to him. She would tell me she'd broken up with him, and then next thing I knew, she would be, taking phone calls from him. It was a very volatile relationship. She would scream at him on the phone like, "Are you stupid? What are you doing? Stop phoning me and bugging me." And next thing I know, she would disappear for a couple of days, and she'd be staying at his place with his mom and his two younger siblings.
Brooke felt sorry for Jerime. She told her mom he didn't have a great family life, and she felt she could help him turn his life around.
Then comes the last beating that I was aware of. And she was staying with him at his mom's place, and he beat her up again one night. She got away from him and ran to a friend's place, and they told him, "Go on, get out of here." So she came home, and this time he'd really gone after her face. She had black eye, chunks of hair ripped out. I still have the coat that she was wearing. There's a big footprint on the back of the coat. And she told me, she said, "This time, Mom, I'm done. It's over." Well, we did take her to a doctor, and the first thing the doctor said to her was, "Let me guess, someone that's supposed to love you did this to you."
The beating was so severe, Donna took photos, proof of what Jerime did to her. Donna even called police, but when officers arrived, Brooke wasn't willing to talk about what happened.
When, like most victims, when you're beaten half to death, you feel partially responsible and ashamed.
Once again, Jerime Mallette promised he would change. If she would just give him another chance, things would be different this time.
"Oh yeah, I love you. I won't ever do this again," and love.
That's when Brooke decided it was time for a change. She made a plan with one of her girlfriends to go on an adventure of a lifetime.
"Let's go travel Europe, get a job, save some money, we'll go to Europe." And to Brooke, that was very appealing. And that was the reason for the road crew job, was because she was making good money. She had a savings account for the first time in her life. It was flagging on road crews, so when you're going through a construction zone, you see the little flaggers there with the slow sign or the stop sign, or directing traffic through the construction areas. She found their lifestyle quite appealing because these guys only work seasonally. And when they do work, they make big money. And then they take the winter off and they travel, or they, just hang out, do whatever. She loved it. She loved the freedom. But she did say more than once that she missed us and she couldn't wait to come home to see us.
In late summer of 2000, Brooke had a short break between jobs.
I'd come home from a camping trip and she was home. And I said, "Oh, you're here." And she said, "Yeah, I'm just passing through. I start this job in Rocky Mountain House. I think it was the Tuesday or Wednesday after the long weekend she was leaving. The night before, she had been out quite late. So I do remember getting up when she came in and saying, "Okay, well, good luck, and I love you, and, keep in touch." And she left me a note that morning where they were staying, and I had gotten her a Tell Us Call Me card, and it had something like $100 of long distance on it. And I said, "If you need me, call me. If you want to talk to me, call me. Use this card. You can call from anywhere."
That week, Brooke began work in Rocky Mountain House. A few weeks later, Brooke's best friend called Donna. She had some bad news to share. Jerime Mallette had somehow tracked Brooke down.
She phoned me and she said, "He's up there." And I said, "He better not be." And she said, "Oh yeah, he's there." So I called Brooke and I left her a message, and she called me back. She said, "No, Mom, geez, you worry too much. He's not here," when he was sitting right there, because she knew I was going to give her hell if I had found out he was there. I likely would have gotten in my car and driven up there and gotten her.
What Donna didn't know was that Jerime had been there for a few weeks. After he arrived in Rocky Mountain House, Brooke tried to help him by convincing the paving crew to give him a job.
Well, he did get on with the crew and promptly hurt his back, so couldn't work, had to sit in the truck. He would listen to the radio conversations between the crew and Brooke and ask these guys, "Why are you flirting with my girlfriend? Leave my girlfriend alone." So the tension started between him and the crew very, very early after his arrival.
Brooke called her mom faithfully every few days, but she never talked about Jerime. Donna didn't think there was anything to worry about. Her daughter sounded happy, if anything, a bit homesick.
She says, "I really miss you, Mom. I really miss you guys." I said, "Well, I can't wait for you to come home. I miss you too." And she said, "No, I really miss you." And I said, "Well, what do you think? I miss you too, and I love you, and I want you to come home." She goes, "I really love you guys too." And that was our last conversation.
In hindsight, Donna knows there was a lot Brooke didn't share.
Because she wouldn't tell me what her plans were when she got back to Calgary.
So you knew something was up.
Yeah, I knew something wasn't right.
On September 29th, 2000, RCMP investigator Dave Gravatt got called to Rocky Mountain House.
Yeah, Rocky Mountain House, the town itself is fairly big. It was a population, I believe, when I was there last, because I had worked there after. It was a town, I think, about 6,500 people. It was a sort of a hub town for oil and gas and the logging industry. So it was a very busy town.
At that time, Gravatt was assigned to the Major Crimes Unit in Red Deer, an hour east of Rocky Mountain House. Gravatt is retired now, but served with the RCMP for 32 years. This case sticks out in his mind even 2 decades later.
My role in this particular case is I was would have been the primary investigator.
Gravatt said it all started with a call to police about a man who claimed he was the victim of an assault.
He was at the 7-Eleven. People from the 7-Eleven said this guy was all bloody.
The man called his grandmother, who then called police. When they arrived, officers said the man was unruly, so he was pepper sprayed. As well, his hand was cut up. Police took him to hospital for treatment. Gravatt said, given his injuries and demeanor, something seemed off. Investigators retraced the man's steps, which led them to a local motel where he was staying. That's when police found a horrific scene. Brooke Clapson was dead. She had been stabbed 30 times. Jerime Mallette was taken in for questioning.
He didn't tell the investigators anything. When we interrogated him, he gave every excuse that he possibly could, and the interview was a couple hours, but he wasn't saying anything. He didn't say anything. Basically saying that, he kind of intimating that he had been a victim, and he was crying, and he really showed little or no remorse for his girlfriend. It was all about him. That's a pretty good indicator when you're watching something like this and you go, someone so supposedly so close to you has been brutally murdered, and it's all about you, somehow, your first instinct is, okay, there's further things that we have to dig into here. He was trying to save himself, basically. Sometimes when you're doing these particular interviews, it's sometimes with what you don't say that sometimes give investigators an opportunity to take other avenues. Like, he wasn't offering any really concrete defense, but he wasn't saying anything that could help him. If you're an innocent person and you've been accused of something, you can tell by the person's demeanor and his ability to want you to believe what has happened or how he's not involved. Like, sometimes you can tell within about 10 seconds that person's not involved. I don't care if it's a homicide or a break-in. When you bring someone in and they haven't done it or they haven't been near it, they'll just say, listen, I have nothing to do with this. There's their voice inflection and the way they're acting and their body language tells you. This guy here is slumped over and talking, I don't know, I can't remember, wasn't me, weak denials, but offering no concrete background to what was happening the night before.
RCMP investigator Dave Gravatt quickly learned Mallette had a long history with police.
Well, I would categorize him as nothing more than a criminal. One of the things that when you're doing these investigations, I got called from people in Calgary who were involved in the drug trade, and they were offering to make me a deal that they would testify against Jerime if I would have their charges withdrawn, stuff like that. There was a couple of guys phoned me up and said, yeah, I really liked Brooke, and Jeremy's a real piece of shit, and I was there when he assaulted her. And I said, okay, good, I'll take your statement. Well, first we got to make a deal here first. I got charges with Calgary, and I want them withdrawn. I said, sorry, I can't help you. I said, my investigation is going along very well. I said, I'm not going to jeopardize it because I want to get you off on drug charges with the Calgary Police Service. I said, it doesn't work that way.
Police also learned about the alleged prior abuse against Brooke. Even though charges weren't laid, the incident was documented.
Yeah, there was a previous history. I contacted the Calgary police, and there was a record of him beating on her and doing a lot of physical things where she didn't proceed with charges. She didn't want to. So there was a background to him. This was not first time he'd ever assaulted her. He was just a person who had no self-esteem, no ability to think. He was a follower, had nothing to fall back on. So what? He wants to make himself feel stronger and better by picking on someone who is actually trying to help him, trying to be in a relationship with him. So, and he took advantage of that. And unfortunately, that's why it sticks in my mind. Here's a young girl who's, trying to help this guy out, and then it cost her her life.
I was there the day Jerime Mallette was arrested and charged. Back then, especially in smaller towns, the RCMP would walk offenders from their vehicle to the back door of the courthouse. So I stood just a few feet away from Mallette as this happened. He was wearing a blue prison jumpsuit, and he tried to cover his face with a handcuffed hand that was wrapped in bandages. Jerime Mallette was accused of the second-degree murder of Brooke Clapson.
It was overwhelming in terms of, motive and opportunity. He was the only guy.
I'm sure by now, given the background, this case seems like a bit of a slam dunk. But that's not how Gravatt operated.
But, a lot of people say, oh, it's in the bag, homicide and everything else. But, there's no such thing. Because right from the beginning, when you get the phone call and the first person who shows up has to make really good notes on exactly what the person is saying. Okay, because if you don't do that and you go in there with sort of, oh, yeah, we got this guy, we got the knife, let's just lock him up and charge him. The law does not allow for that when you have first and second degree murder and manslaughter. Once it gets to court in that big oak bench, the judge has to follow certain parts of case law, and you have to break down the offense and what was said, what was done. Now, if you do a shoddy job right from the beginning and just arrest the guy, take him to the detachment or to the hospital and don't do any follow-up with it, that person could walk away, okay? So if you don't do it right the first time, you get no second chance.
Investigators worked tirelessly with veteran Crown Prosecutor Luke Carrata to make sure all evidence was gathered and the case was solid.
You don't want to take a good case and have someone get off on it and just say, oh, it's a manslaughter and it was an act of passion, and have someone do 2 years in jail. Because that in itself is not right, because that's not what it is. You have to prove, okay? Just because someone appears to have done something, you still have to come in have enough background and history to make sure that charge is followed all the way through and that you can convince a judge and or a jury that this person is guilty of what they've been charged with.
The investigation unfolded very quickly, and at the same time police were gathering evidence, Donna Eaton was blindsided.
It probably plays through my head at least once a day. I was at work and the receptionist called me and said, someone's here to see you. And it was like, who is here to see me? She goes to the person, what's your name? And she gave me a name and I don't remember it now. And I said, I don't know who that is. Have they got the right person? Because I was really busy that day. I was getting ready to go on vacation, and she said, no, they're here and they said they need to see you. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake. So I went up front, and here's two people standing at the front reception desk. And she said, is there someplace we can talk? And I said, what's wrong with here? And I knew they were cops right away. And the first thing I thought is, oh my gosh, what has Brooke done now? Don't tell me I have to spend my vacation driving up to Rocky to pick her up. And they said, it's about your daughter, Brooke. And I said, oh, I know. And they said, well, we really need to talk to you in private. And I was like, no, you can tell me here. It's fine. They had a couple of chairs in the front reception area, and they sat me down, one on either side of me, which I thought was really weird. And the one officer, the female officer, touched my arm and looked me in the face and said, Brooke is dead. And the first thing that came to mind was, because she had told me on many occasions that she'd almost been hit by cars trying to get around the construction. So my first thought was that she had been hit by a vehicle and killed. And then she said it was her boyfriend. And I looked at her and said, she doesn't have a boyfriend. And the cop said, well, do you know Jerime Mallette? And I went, that rotten rat bastard. He finally got her. I remember it like it happened yesterday. And then I started screaming, I guess. I don't recall much.
In a heartbeat, her life was shattered.
Gone. Gone. Everything. Hopes, dreams, stability, gone. Brooke, gone. gone.
Just hours later, Donna got another call. It was Jerime Mallette.
He called our home from custody. I had just gotten home. It was insanity. There were doors opening and people coming through the doors, and the phone was ringing, and my boyfriend was talking to my stepmom on the phone. Then he hung up and the phone rang, and I saw that on the call display that it was Rocky RCMP. So I picked it up to a click, and I knew it was him. I knew it. Well, what I did was I hung up and I phoned right back to the RCMP station in Rocky, like identified myself. And I said, did he just use the telephone? So what had happened was he had told them that he wanted to call his lawyer. And what they had to do was dial the number, give him the phone, and then leave the room so he could talk to his lawyer. But what he did as soon as they left the room was he hung up and he phoned me. Nancy, the only thing I can, after years of thinking about this, the only thing I can come up with, it was, number one, to continue to control, and number two, to let me know that he was still able to get to me.
That call has haunted Donna for years, but she had to focus on her family. She had Brooke's little sister, Becky, to worry about.
Tell you, the second hardest thing of this whole situation was looking my 10-year-old in the face and telling her her sister is dead, and watching her innocence and childhood blow into a million pieces right in front of my eyes. I watched her little face explode into grief and hurt and betrayal. I saw my 10-year-old turn into a 50-year-old right in front of my face. You do put the grieving process aside. And I mean, I had Becky. Becky was only 10. I had to worry about her. I couldn't worry about me. I had to get this child on track and try and keep her as sane as possible.
Back in Red Deer, Luke Carrata was working on the case. He's now retired after 35 years prosecuting for Alberta Justice.
It's an irony, perhaps, but yes, I imagine that it would have probably been your newscast that was at least one source of my being informed of the homicide.
Investigators filled him in on the evidence they had gathered.
With a serious criminal file like this that involves violence and where there are victims that are severely impacted, my practice personally was to move very quickly. And I would say that any capable Crown that's dedicated would move very quickly to get the best grasp she or he could of the file as quickly as possible. Multiple stab wounds that appeared to be randomly placed. There was no apparent pattern. They were randomly placed stab wounds to the young lady's body. That frequently is indicative of rage, anger, loss of control. This was a very intentional and a very driven series of actions to take Brooke Clapson's life.
Through evidence provided by police and witnesses, Carrata was able to get a clearer picture of Mallette's violent history.
He was a person that had apparently little or no emotional control, and he was prone to anger as an immediate reaction to anything that caused him stress. The current information of the time with respect to domestic assaults was that there were 32 incidents of domestic violence on average to a spouse, and particularly the female spouse, before the violence was reported to the police. Given that information, abusive history is pursued because it's highly relevant to the investigation and the prosecution.
The history, including the photos of the prior assault on Brooke, became very important. You'll remember Donna said she had a black eye and chunks of her hair ripped out.
It was motivated by jealousy and unfounded jealousy, and by anger, and by a lack of personal restraint. In other words, personality deficiencies, immaturity, lack of discipline, much like a spoiled child, to put it in everyday language. She, I think, had concerns about an ongoing relationship. Brooke had concerns about an ongoing relationship with him. I think she had expressed that, and it wasn't that she hated him or anything like that. She just felt that there was a sense of she had a sense of wisdom about the situation, where they should both go about their lives carefully, and so she wasn't opposed to helping him get employment, and I don't think he could get employment in Calgary. So that is why she initiated him coming to the crew, and she thought it would be a good thing for him. And unfortunately, he was as unpopular on the crew as she was popular.
Friends and coworkers provided key information about what happened that night, and that was later shared with Brooke's mother.
Well, they were at the wrap-up party, the job wrap-up party, and he was acting all jealous and possessive towards Brooke, and Brooke was finally trying to break away from him because she knew she was coming to Calgary, and she knew she wasn't going to continue the relationship once they got back. And he was, the guys were telling him to take off and leave them alone, and he was listening outside the window of the room they were partying in as these guys were calling him a loser and telling her she deserved better than him and what was she doing with him. And he came rushing into the room and grabbed her by the arm and said, "We're leaving." And that's when a couple of these guys jumped up and were going to take him out back and beat the shit out of him for grabbing her and stuff. And once again, she came to his rescue and saved his skin. Told the guys, no, it's okay. I'll leave with him. So she left with him.
Even that night, after all he put her through, Brooke gave Jerime the benefit of the doubt. Right until the end, she wanted to help him. When they got back to the hotel room, Mallette attacked her. He stabbed her over and over again. He put a knife through her chest, upper extremities, hand, and groin. Some of those stab wounds penetrated her body completely. He continued to pierce the knife through her body, even after she was dead. This evidence was presented at a preliminary inquiry. During a prelim, the prosecution presents a lot of its case, and then a judge decides if there's enough evidence to go to trial. In this case, Mallette was ordered to stand trial for second-degree murder.
I had that hope that defense counsel would see the futility of trying to run a trial that would just bring more pain upon the people in Brooke Clapson's world. And so that was my tactic, and it wasn't a secret tactic. I made it clear to defense counsel that was my intention, and it was respected, and the defense counsel, so far as I'm concerned, probably did the most sensible thing that a very capable defense counsel could do. And that was, he proposed a guilty plea.
I should clarify, prosecutor Luke Carrata was hoping Mallette would plead guilty to second-degree murder, a deliberate killing that occurs without planning and doesn't meet the threshold for first-degree murder.
I was absolutely resolved that this was not a manslaughter case. This was not a case where he stumbled along. He was, for example, intoxicated or something of that nature. It was clear that there was a vague intention at the best, and I could prove it, that he came to Rocky Mountain House and to the little world of Brooke Clapson with a hostile, angry animus.
Dave Gravatt said he was aligned with Carrata, that this was a clear case of second-degree murder.
I remember thinking, and the investigator saying, like, this guy is trouble. Okay, he's just a little guy, underweight, mouthy crybaby. I said, but he's dangerous. And I said, and the thing is, that's why we went with, have to go with the second-degree murder and make sure it gets prosecuted. I can't tell you how many hours Luke Carrata and I sat around talking about how we were going to make sure we had everything. Numerous hours we sat there and say, okay, let's make sure, we really want to make sure this is done perfectly, because this guy is dangerous. There's no way in the world that as an investigator or a prosecutor, you want anyone walking away from something where they should be punished. I mean, guy gets a 2 to 4 year manslaughter and then he's out of jail, and then this guy's back out on the street again looking for the next Brooke.
Basically, my position when we went to court in the fall of 2001 was that it's clearly a second-degree murder. There's no issue. He's young. He has a minimum 10 years incarceration in which to develop and seek and evolve to being a better human being.
And that's exactly how it all unfolded in court. Jerime Mallette admitted to killing Brooke and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. It was during the court proceedings that I first met Brooke's family. Donna was too upset to do an interview at that time, but I spoke with Brooke's grandmother.
She wasn't perfect, who is, but she's a perfect granddaughter, I can honestly say that. He actually killed the one thing that was probably the best thing that ever happened in his life. She cared for him. She used to say, Grandma, I want to, nobody cares for him like I do. I want him to get better. I want him to get off drugs, and I care. I love him.
In a statement made through his lawyer, Jerime Mallette apologized to Brooke's family. He hopes one day her family will be able to forgive him.
He looked bad, but I'd feel bad too if I was going to prison for life. So whether he was remorseful on his own behalf or on what he did to Brooke.
In sentencing Mallette to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 10 years, Justice Jack Holmes called Mallette's actions impulsive and horrible. I should note, while he was eligible to apply for parole after 10 years, the parole board doesn't have to grant it. The oversight of the parole board and the necessity to follow rules set out by the board really becomes apparent in this case. In 2013, Mallette was assessed as a moderate to high risk to reoffend violently. At that time, 13 years after he killed Brooke, he was turned down for day parole, but granted unescorted temporary absences for personal development, specifically to attend a substance abuse treatment program. A year later, in 2014, he again applied for day parole, but was turned down. The board said, while on his leave to attend treatment, he accessed an online dating site and made a connection with a woman. In their decision, the board expressed concern that Mallette told them he wasn't interested in a relationship, but his actions and words were inconsistent. The board concluded he demonstrated a lack of insight or deliberate manipulation. In 2015, the board noted he was assessed as a high risk for spousal violence. While out on an unescorted temporary absence, he failed to check in. He said he was at the library when he was actually with a female friend and her children. His privileges were revoked. In 2016, escorted temporary absences were also suspended after he became involved with a woman in AA meetings. It was only in 2017, 16 years into his sentence and 17 years after he killed Brooke, that he was granted day parole. He's been living in a halfway house ever since. If you're serving a life sentence and you're granted parole, you'll always be supervised and under the direction of the parole board. So even if you're out on parole, if you breach your conditions, you could be sent back into custody. In January of 2020, he was again assessed as a moderate to high risk for violence and a high risk for intimate partner violence. The psychologist who did the assessment noted he has a history of deceiving staff and denying or minimizing his actions. He told the board he didn't know why he became violent with Brooke or why he was unable to walk away rather than kill her. At that time, he was denied full parole, but day parole continued. As I wrote this episode in November of 2020, I received another parole decision. This decision states that Mallette is currently employed as a general laborer and has participated in weekend leave passes from the halfway house without issue, but also noted ongoing concerns with online dating and lies he's told about his online activity. The board said Mallette met a woman and at the time of his latest hearing was in a romantic relationship. He is not allowed to go to her home until his parole officer can visit the home and interview the woman's child. Mallette's day parole is extended for another 6 months. More than 20 years after he killed Brooke, he is still not granted full parole. The prosecutor, who ensured Mallette would be held accountable, said that speaks volumes about his risk.
That's suggestive of serious shortcomings and failures on his part to be constructive about the incarceration. It's consistent with him being a sociopathic personality, consistent with him being narcissistic, immature.
Both Karada and the lead investigator, Dave Gravatt, still think about Brooke and her family.
That I took particular note of the dynamics of the relationship and the fact that Brooke was a young lady that was motivated and very dedicated to helping Jerime move ahead in life, to mature, to become a little more constructive in his life, productive. And it struck me as a great tragedy that Brooke did not realize the futility of her efforts.
Biggest part of this and why I remember it was always the family. I always feel for the family. After, I mean, seemed like very nice people, and it was just, one of the things that was sticks with me, and I hope they find peace. And I was a parent at that time myself. I had kids that age. I got 5 kids, and had kids that age too. And as a parent, you're always hoping, but your kids, when they get to be later teens and that, they do have their own life, and sometimes you're not always privy to everything that's happening. Isn't it great that we know he's got a life sentence and that at least they can have a hold on him to get him back in jail if he offends? Because if you don't have that, somebody in the year 2020 says, what, this guy did a murder one time? The system failed us. Well, it didn't fail you. We actually have him. The police and the prosecution did as much as they can to make sure that this guy is always under the watchful eye of the parole board.
Brooke's mother attends every hearing.
I have to tell the truth for Brooke. I am her voice now. And the way he tells it cannot be the way the parole board or the public hears it. Number one, my worry is that he's going to come looking for us. Just because I have been a thorn in his side since the moment he met Brooke. Number two, that he will hurt someone else, because he does. He starts to hunt the minute someone's back is turned. He's gone through a relationship with someone in his AA group. He hunts from the moment he's been given an absence. He hops on a computer and hunts, puts on profiles on Plenty of Fish, and he hunts for a new victim immediately.
More than 2 decades after her daughter was brutally murdered, Donna Eaton still struggles with the pain and grief of losing Brooke.
Like, everyone wants you to get over it, move on. Well, we do move on. But I'm telling you, the system drags you right back in like a tidal wave.
Because every time you try to heal, there's a hearing. Or
Yep. We just get to a place where we're feeling comfortable and we're coping well and things are moving. And then bam, he wants out.
The statistics on domestic violence are staggering. Most go unreported. If you know someone who is being stalked or abused, don't give up trying to help them.
Because the manipulators are so good at keeping the victims within their reach, people assume, well, she must like it, or she wants to be there, or she wouldn't be there. It's not that simple. I remember telling her many times, baby, next time he'll kill you. Don't give him the opportunity.
If you're a victim of abuse, there is no doubt it can feel overwhelming, but there is help available.
If it doesn't feel right, leave. If for 1 minute there is something that you know is not right, leave. And the most dangerous time is when you are making the break. Be your most diligent when you have finally decided to make the break, because that's when the offender becomes violent and will kill, is when you finally made the break. And that's what people forget, because, okay, she's made the break, she's not going to see him anymore. That's when the abuser becomes the most dangerous, because they know that their victim is getting away.
Every day, Donna recalls her last conversation with her daughter. She holds those words dear, as Brooke always knew she was supported and loved.
I really love you and I really miss you, and I can't wait to see you again. If I didn't have that to reflect back on, that little conversation of both of us expressing how much we loved each other and how much we missed each other, I really don't think I could have made it this far without her. Because, my relationship with Brooke, I always felt like I was forever giving her shit. I was forever, trying to get her on the right path and angry with her for something. And for our last conversation to be heartfelt and how much we meant to each other really, really holds me up when I need it.
Remember Brooke's plan to go on an adventure of a lifetime with her girlfriend after she finished working in Rocky Mountain House? Her mother, sister, and friend still went on that trip. In the end, Brooke's ashes were scattered all over Europe by those who loved her the most. If you are the victim of domestic abuse or know someone who is, there is help available. In Canada, you can call the Assaulted Women's Hotline toll-free at 1-866-863-0511. Thank you for joining me and listening to Brooke's story. Crime Beat is written and produced by me, Nancy Hixt, with producer Dila Velasquez. Audio editing and sound design is by Rob Johnston. Special thanks to photographer-editor Danny Lantella for his work on this episode. And thanks to Chris Bassett, the acting VP of National and Network News for Global News. I would love to have you tell a friend about this podcast, and you can help me share these important stories by rating and reviewing Crime Beat on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can find me on Twitter at Nancy Hixt, on Facebook at Nancy Hixt Crime Beat, and I'd love to have you join me for added content on Instagram at nancy.hixt. That's nancy.hixt. Thanks again for listening. Please join me next time.